making the most of this thing while I can. This can all be over in a flash.
Hello, ShotDeck friends. We got another Shot Talk. And here's the deal. This is, I hope, the first part of a much longer series of 2 or 3 with Mandy to talk about her whole career. But I'm jumping the gun because I haven't introduced her yet. But today we have the great Mandy Walker, and we're going to talk about the movie Elvis, the Warner Brothers Baz Luhrmann film. Hey, Mandy. And we're going to just kind of talk. The movie is incredibly complex. It you know, goes across decades and decades of Elvis's life, and you know, Aussies making it in Australia. Sacrilege, except they seem to do it with such care and love for Elvis and his family and his history, and it's a really, really beautiful told story, and I truly, really think it's one of the best films of the year, particularly from cinematography standpoint. I think Mandy's work is incredible, and we wanted to shine a spotlight on it this time of year, and just get cracking with Mandy here. So welcome.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks. Hi, everybody.
There we go. Well, I always like to start. Well, first I'm going to just share ShotDeck here for a second, share the screen, because we have a bunch of Mandy's work on the site. I mean, we have 9 films. Let me just start here. We've got films from like Jane Got a Gun in Australia, and Mulan, and obviously Elvis, which we're going to talk about, but also Hidden Figures, a great film. Ted Melfi, who I've worked with, he said he had an amazing experience with you. And then some early ones like Tracks,
yep.
and even films like Red Riding Hood and Truth. So anybody who goes on, besides what you're going to learn tonight from Elvis, you know, about Elvis, you know, there's just the incredible work of Mandy on the site that you can see that runs the gamut of all kinds of genres and looks and all these things. So how did you get started in this whole thing? And tell me a little bit about the backstory.
I think, you know, my mum was a painter and was really interested in art, and my parents took me to the cinema really early on when I was quite young, and quite regularly too, and to art galleries, and I was always interested in reading and storytelling, and then I had a darkroom in my backyard when I was at high school, and I was doing my own black and white photography. And so when I was about 14 or 15, I sort of thought, well, putting all these things together, all these things that I love and passionate about, why don't I become a cinematographer? There's storytelling, there's art, cinema, and photography. And so I decided really early on, and I ended up leaving university at the end of my first term. I was doing an arts degree, and I got a job on a movie as a runner, a PA, and then I just, you know, started connecting with people and telling them I wanted to be in the camera department, and I worked my way up from the bottom. I was a loader when I was 18, and then I basically just worked my way up as a focus puller and first AC, and then I didn't operate very much. I did a couple of features operating, and then but I was always shooting little films myself, you know, with friends or student films or music videos, and I basically taught myself how to light. But I think, you know, being an assistant taught me about how a set is run and what everybody's jobs are, and a relationship between a cinematographer and a director, and a cinematographer and their team. So I'm really glad I did it that way, but that's basically how I made it up to here.
What were you running on those early for that first job? I was a runner on my first job too, and I remember
Really?
I pestered the camera department the entire time. It's just saying I want to be in your department, and
yeah, same here. I was running the film, the negative, back to the
That's
lab,
what I
and
was. I just was back and forth. Yeah, that's right.
yeah,
There you
exactly.
go.
And occasionally, you know, picking up photocopiers or something like that. But yeah, and being on set as much as I could. So yeah, very similar.
And then when you say you taught yourself to light, also very similar to how, in what ways? Like by just trial and error in the things you got opportunities to shoot, any chance you could get, just sort of experimenting with just different things on anything you get your hands on. And what was that experimentation like? Like, would you? I mean, because if it's for pay, you can always take certain risks, and then you have to sort of find your ways to experiment. You don't have a lot of time to experiment sometimes when you're getting paid to do something, because it could also get you shipped home.
Exactly. I think it was in the very early projects I was involved in, which were student films and music videos. And music videos, I mean, at that time, like, however long ago it was, 25 years ago or something, they were much more kind of, they were more prolific, like there was a lot of them. And there were chances to try different things and work with directors that wanted to be inventive, and that sort of taught me also about that relationship of finding a reference or explaining the visual language to someone in words, and then how being able to find that physically or technically and create it. And also I started in really low budget things, so it was also about you talk about Lantana. That's that first film that you're talking about with Nancy LaPaglia.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, Lantana. That's right. It was a cool film.
Yeah,
Like a very
it was.
interesting film.
It still holds up, that movie. I actually saw it just recently. But on that movie, the director said to me, I don't want to... there were 3 rules. He wanted to shoot on film, on 35mm. He didn't want me to light unless I absolutely had to light. But he also wanted it to be beautiful. He said, I don't want it to look like a documentary. I don't want it to look like everybody is going to be in shitty light all the time. So... The way that I approached that was, I said to him, well, locations are really important, and time of day, and if we can work around that, then, and also the way he blocked things was, I mean, he was very understanding in terms of if someone's walking down a hallway and it's completely black down there, he'd say, oh, let's just stop a little bit further forward and there's a bit of window light there, and things like that. So, but I just spent my whole job, and it was the first job I didn't operate on. And I think it was like, I think I'd shot like about 7 or 8 movies before that, and I always operated. And on this one, I didn't, because I literally sat on the iris and on the iris control next to the camera. And when people were walking around and all the cameras moving around, I rode the iris the whole time. So that was a really great, lesson for me to learn about available light and how that works, and to work with. It was a really pretty low budget movie, and that
what a beautiful
that,
and challenging brief. It's just such a great brief, though, because I feel like we all need constraints, right? You don't, an unlimited sort of thing is often, you almost have to create your own constraints. And in that regard, what a great challenge, to know that the director was actually requesting this and on board with this.
Yeah, exactly. And there was a couple of scenes where, like, there was a night scene in a forest, and I said, now, Ray, we might have to do a little bit of lighting here. Or we were looking at doing day for night, but he didn't like it. And we looked at a lot of examples. He just said, it doesn't look real enough to me. We didn't have any money for VFX or anything, so it had to be real. So we used the headlights, and I had one the biggest balloon light that I could get at the time, and that's what we used. And he was okay with that, because it just looked like ambient moonlight, and it was very limited in terms of what we were doing. And we used the real car headlights. So that was like one of the only times I lit anything in that movie.
I feel like I remember that specifically because, at the time, when you're shooting small and low budget things, and with trying to figure out how to have that available light, Fargo was always like, oh, let's hook some park cans up and they'll light the road ahead of you, and you could be in the back seat, and this idea of using headlights, and I guess there's also in To Die, maybe is it To Die For? There's something else where like because early days, it's like you watch films with the hope of making them, And then you sort of are always interested in who was the camera person on
Yeah.
this, and I remember Lantana seeing it in the theater, and I really
Oh,
really
nice.
was struck by it.
But
I gotta like watch this one.
But don't you think also, like, as much as I watched other people work and light, you don't really get it until you have to do it yourself, until you're actually in that
That's for darn
situation,
sure.
isn't it? Like, you can try and replicate something that someone else has done, but it's never the same. It's like, I always find this when, people do show you their camera tests or there's camera, and you go, well, I don't actually know what situation you were in and what was your ratio and what stop you were on and all the rest of it, and how much light was coming in, and until you actually physically do it yourself. But I also want to say, and I'm sure you're the same too, is I'm really glad I started on film, shooting on film, because that teaches you so much about exposure, and you're always working with grayscale and with highlights and shadows, rather than, I feel like now when I talk to people a few people that have started on shooting on digital, they're just looking at the image on the monitor and not thinking about that. Whereas we were always, you wouldn't see anything till you got your dailies. You were on set working with your eye and making it look good to eye first. And I still work that way with digital, but that's what that taught me, I feel.
100%. I couldn't agree more. Yeah. And in a way, I felt like it was way more daring early days, and it took so many risks because, there was no other option really. Too, you didn't have an option to choose from. If the film was what you had to shoot on, 35 or 16, and also in that constraint thing, it was kind of nicer. When digital started coming on, I was like, I don't know, I don't need this choice.
Yeah.
Let me just stick with this. This is working out just fine.
Yeah.
And then it became, now you have to actually think about that choice very specifically. And obviously, like with a film like Hidden Figures, where Ted is very keen on shooting film as well. I did a small movie with him as well, and it's often dictated by the director in a lot of ways nowadays.
Yeah.
As much as the DP.
Yeah. But that's one of the first things he said to me.
Yeah, very
when we
true.
were going to shoot Hidden Figures. He said, "We're going to shoot on film," and I hadn't shot film for a few years.
That's what he said to me too.
Yeah.
Well, you did a really, really lovely job. I think you did a lot better job than I did with Ted. I can tell you that. In terms of, I loved him. I loved working with him immensely, and we still have worked together since. But I felt like I was like, all right, you were a big standard to bear against. But and I hadn't shot film in a couple of years, so it was a little bit like, whoa, yeah, and weird because you do it for 25 years, you think you'll never forget, or that it will just come right back.
You need more lights. That's what I forgot about. You actually need more lights. You need to have control.
Yeah, I mean, I had an experience on Friday night where me and my gaffer Rafi were like, this doesn't make sense. None of this adds up to the meter right now. Like, the meter says we should be 2 stops underexposed, and we're shooting at a 2.8. I don't understand what's happening here. It was very strange. And we still were sort of, I kept going, let's take a meter out and figure out where we're at. And it was like very, very, still a bit like, wow, I can't believe this is how it works. All right, so Baz Luhrmann.
I do that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, yeah, obviously, well, in Australia was a shot on film as well, because, that. So how do you, Baz Luhrmann, who's, of course, as heralded an Australian filmmaker as there is, but also worldwide, of course, and is known for being incredibly visual. And so I'm always curious how you got to shoot Australia, and what was that experience like first working with Baz, who had already established himself not only as a director, but as a director who had very distinctive, stylistic choices and those kind of things. Like, how did that come to pass and begin this experience that continues on today?
Well, he had, funny enough, you mentioned Lantana. That's the film that he saw that I had shot that brought me to his attention. And then he was going to do a Chanel No. 5. It's a little film, actually. It wasn't really a commercial. It was like a 5-minute little film. And, we spent a few weeks shooting it and working on it, and then shooting, I think we shot in 4 days, but we spent like 3 weeks in prep on that. And then that was the first job we did together. We shot that on film too with Nicole Kidman. And after that, he came up to me a couple of months later and he said, I really want to work with you again. Are you interested in doing Australia? And for me, like the last film I'd shot was Lantana, which was like a $10 million film, and in American dollars, and Australia was like over $100 million movie, but I'd been doing a lot of pretty big budget commercials too, and I felt very confident um, and that I could do it, and I took the leap, and I went, yeah, absolutely, I'll do that. So that was the first film we did together, and then since then we've done another Chanel project with Giselle, and then Elvis. So, but that was like 20 years ago we started working together, and Baz doesn't make films very often.
Right.
And then so yeah, we've had that relationship, and now I feel like, because he's a visionary, and he works in a very collaborative way, and I have to say, and for him, pre-production is really important, and also just finding out the visual language in a way that everybody feels comfortable with, and we're all on the same page way before we shoot. So we do a lot of testing, a lot of and he gets me involved really early. For instance, on Elvis, I was there for Austin's audition, which was like 6 months
Whoa,
before.
really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Because
man.
I know he has me there, and we both have these Leica. We have Leica M6s, but we also have Leica digital cameras, and we both were there and taking photos of him when he was doing his audition. He was doing a performance, and those images are the first time that I start exploring the character, and looking at different angles and saying, well, look at this 3/4. He looks much more like Elvis like this, or on a wider lens, this is great for these kind of movement. That's when it all starts. And then, because it's also it's there's a lot of historical reference for Elvis, obviously, performance videos and concert footage and his movies and home movies and stills. Like, it was a huge undertaking, all that research into all the historical elements, and really importantly, one of the first things he said, Baz had said to me, was that the what he called train spotting, and train spotting is us shooting an exact replica of existing footage of Elvis, and the concert sequences in particular. So there was some reference for the very early Hayride, which is the one with him in the pink suit. There was some stills photos we found of that, and then the '68 special, which is
Right.
Do you want to pull shots, or the
Yeah.
yeah,
So the Hayride stuff, the early
that's
days.
the
Like, was
pink suit.
this actually sequence in here,
It's that,
or was
yes,
pre?
that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sequence, and there we only had some stills photographs of that. So this is for myself, the art department, costume, makeup, everybody, and what Baz wanted to do was for us to, when we get to like the '68 special, which is the NBC show,
Oh
for
gosh,
us,
I remember that sequence is unbelievable in the film.
yeah. Oh,
I can
thank
go
you,
ahead with
thank
that.
you.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And then there was, I'll just quickly name them, then we can look at some stuff if you want. Then there was the Russwood concert, which is the one where the police come and take him off stage.
Yes.
And that was documented by Alfred Wertheimer, who's a stills photographer that was traveling around with Elvis for a few months. And he took stills, and he also took some 16mm footage. So that was our reference for that. And then there's the Vegas concert. That's the way it is, which you can go and watch on YouTube or whatever. But so what we did was, for a lot of those sequences, he wanted us to replicate it exactly. So the lighting, the camera angles, the lensing, the camera movement. So that was part of my research as well, going through, like, walking around as the sets were being built and working out where all the cameras were going to go and where they needed to be and what lenses and what zooms and when. So as soon as my camera operators came on and the grips, I'd walk them through that as well. And we did a lot of rehearsals, and we did a lot of work with Austin and his choreography, because for a start, my team had to know the music like really well, and the songs. Not that they were singing them, but they had to be familiar with them, and also that footage, but also the choreography, so that everybody knew when he was going to slide over to the right, or when he was going to put his hand up, and what moment they had to catch, and when they were going to zoom in. And for that 68 special, I put our 65mm camera in the housing of one of the old TV cameras to be able to get the exact angle, and also
That's great. That's
so
great.
Just in a nutshell.
Did you think? Let me ask you specifically about that, because I had a similar thing on trying to replicate like Murray Franklin on Joker. Did you think, well, I'll put something else inside that I can control that isn't a 65 inside that same, because they're longer lens zooms and those sort of cameras that we're shooting in the day, and they, in terms of putting the 65 inside. Tell me a little bit about it. Did you consider, like, because you probably had to have all those other cameras representing also, like the TV cameras of sorts. Were those also all 65? Meaning, I can't recall specifically, but most of the footage is like your footage, as opposed to cutting to a television in which you're seeing the sort of, there are monitors and stuff in which we see those same camera positions. Mm-hmm. But were those all effectively LFs or 65s or minis, or what was the logistics of that?
Well, what I wanted to do, because we had to do this a lot, and we had to shoot like also home movie footage, and we had to shoot other concert sequences that were in the montage that were meant to be specific references to other documentaries that were visual language that we'd found in the those split screen sections. Like, some of them were meant to look like 8 mils.
Yes, of course.
But in the end, we decided, because we had 2 sets of lenses for the movie, and there was spherical lenses up to for the first half of the film, and then when he goes to Las Vegas in the 70s, we go anamorphic, and because.
And what was the kit? Like, those sphericals were what, and the anamorphics were what?
The sphericals were Panavision Sphero 65s, and the anamorphics were T-series anamorphic, Panavision again. But they were very bespoke. So what I did was, talking about pre-production, I took Baz into Panavision, again, really early, before we started pre-production, after we talked about script. Because, I'm sure for you also, the first thing you do with the director is you talk about story and storytelling. Right. and how they want to the audience to experience the emotion of the characters and the atmosphere of the concerts, and also for us, a lot of those editing tools, like the split screen and the way that the camera moves from one scene to another, was planned, so that we had either boards, or we went in and that Baz works with the and Catherine Martin works with like a concept artist who does things on a computer, the guy Chris Tangay.
Right.
And he would do mock-ups for us, and just to see where, because moving from one set to another, or because Beale Street was on a back lot, but the interior of Club Handy, where he goes in, is on stage in another in another area. So the moves between sets were choreographed, and we had to go through either storyboards or look at, so we'd sit with Chris and work out where the crane would have to go and how we would achieve these transitions. And also, those split screen, we talk with the editors. It's kind of like I was saying, is that Baz is a great collaborator, or everybody gets involved really early. And also, we're all in the meetings with him together, where he'd say, okay, now I want to move from this set to this set, and I want the camera to fly, or, and so we'd all just talk about how that would happen. so that we never got to a set and were not prepared in that sense. So everybody, when we walked into, that showroom, the Hilton, everybody knew what was going on. We knew we had a plan. We had done dress rehearsals, and we knew the transitions, and we knew the different concepts that we're trying to replicate. Then that happens really early on. So it's not like he's not a director. We turn up and we rehearse them and go, okay, well,
I didn't suspect he was. Yeah.
No, but he also.
Right, I mean, not with like the precision and the obviously the very active camera work for sure. And I suspected it was very well thought out.
Sorry, I keep rabbiting on, so stop me if I'm talking too much. But he also.
I love it.
After we have we have this plan and we have rehearsed and we have. Everybody's aware of what we're needing for that scene. And then he does what he calls riffing, which is capturing a moment that's happened that we aren't prepared for. Or Austin does something that, inspires him to do something else. Or the drama of the when the characters are together, something happens in the drama. And I'm sure it happens to you all the time too, that you go, oh, well, we need to do this. Like, look what he's doing over there and that. And we just... Because I've been working with Baz for so long, and we work pretty fast once we get there, we just look at each other and we have this kind of shorthand where you see something will happen and we'll both look at each other and go like this, and we know, okay, we've got to get the crane over there, we've got to do this, and how about that does this move, and so we stand at the monitors together, and we have 3 cameras all the time, and we had sometimes up to 5. So I didn't operate on the film. I think I maybe did on a couple of scenes where I just jumped in for a minute, but hardly ever, because
you got to have some fun.
Yeah,
too.
exactly. But so that kind of thing. We stand in front of the 5 monitors together, and we're constantly discussing, what we're doing, and then whether. We shoot that train spotting sequence, and then we do the riffing, or we have specific shots for the drama, because there's also drama going on during the performances of connection of the characters, or something that's happening off to the side that we know we have to capture that has to be integrated into the performance. So that's a long answer.
Let me ask you a quick question. I know it's perfect, but I'm going to start driving to like specifics of some shots, because we'll get more into because I know you'll be, I get exactly what this was intended. Mm-hmm. But one quick question, which is, first, what was your relationship with Elvis? And 2, have you been to Graceland?
I have been to Graceland, not for this movie. I'd been before when I was a tourist, when I was in my 20s. And my relationship with Elvis was, I was much more familiar with Elvis in the 70s and his movie career. So the sort of early story of him and his relationship with the Colonel, I had no idea. And I had no idea of his influences, of how he was influenced by, the music that he grew up with, in being in Memphis and hanging out with B.B. King, and the being in the Pentecostal tent and the gospel scene, like that kind of stuff I had no idea of. So that was, a brand new part of it for me.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the most, really beautiful things about the film. I have a twin brother who went to medical school in Memphis, and he's like, you got to go to Graceland. And I remembered when Elvis died, because I had a caretaker who was like obsessed, and she was bawling, and I was very young, maybe 4 or 5 years old. And I had no idea. And then my memory was of this is terrible, but like what they would say is like Vegas Elvis or whatever. And they had a worse word for it, but nonetheless. And then I went to Memphis, and I went to Graceland. And then I went back 5 more times over the course of my brother's time there, because I saw like that first of all, just Priscilla taking you through on the headphones through Graceland and the different rooms and all this stuff, but the humanization and the humanizing of him, and also all that connection to the Beale Street and Pentecostal and all that stuff comes through, and I just became like a massive fan of the person Elvis. And it was like, and so I was very interested in this film, but when you were 20, you probably didn't know your future had an entire film devoted to this. Yeah, exactly.
No, I had no idea.
Well, let's jump into some specifics, because I mean, we have like 600 shots because, and by the way, I've already noticed, like, you know, we really need 1,200 because this movie is incredibly visual. It as sort of storytelling device, it goes sort of back and forth between the you know, the the 70s Elvis, and then back to his history, you know, very young. One question I had just early on here, in some of these sort of what would be, I mean, almost a hallucinogenic kind of imagery, was some of this done in post? Was some of it done with, you know, swing and shift? Like, it's incredibly sort of evocative imagery that sort of starts out the film. And tell me a little bit about, you know, some of this imagery here that we're seeing.
We had a Petsval lens that I had made up to work on the 65mm camera. It was 85mm. And I think we had a 55 that we used a little bit as well, but it was mainly 85. And again, because there's a lot of visual effects in the movie in terms of those transitional sequences, and also, we had a Petsval lens, and because there's some sequences that I used it only as reference. So if you go back to like the one where there's like a whole line of the poker machines, we had like 2 lines of like 20 or something. So that was extended in visual effects. So we only
Sure.
he was interacting with. So for instance, a lot of the time I would shoot a reference shot on the Petsval, and then we'd do a clean pass, and then visual effects did add that look, like they mapped the lens, and they would add it later on to sequences that had a lot of visual effects. And then
Well, like this sequence you're in for real, or
yes.
this image is an image from the film, this one of
Yeah.
Elvis from behind.
Yeah, yes, that is.
And that would be an example, I guess, right?
Yeah, that I didn't shoot on the Petsval, but what Baz did do in the end is he asked if we could put a little bit of an effect on the edges of the frame, that's done in post. So
Yeah,
that
sure.
was shot on a regular lens, that shot, and then added. So sometimes there's like a combination, but as much as I could, I gave them a reference of a take with that lens on it, and then they used, and then we'd shoot it clean. And some shots it is just with the Petsval lens, as some of the stuff in Vegas. But yeah, we didn't use a shift and tilt, but really it was the Spheros and in this time period, it was the Spheros and the Petsval.
Let me just ask a little bit about the color palette of this film, which is extremely strong, and for somebody who loves color so much in movies and in art, tell me a little bit about some of the choices, because I mean, let's break down a specific sequence just in terms of, because there's a later stuff in some Tupelo stuff which I'm really interested in the color. But even this sequence outside, and I know I'm just picking something very specific, but first of all, the lighting's really beautiful. But tell me about how you sort of attack this scene and some of this sort of rose-colored light and those kind of choices. Just take me through this sequence a little bit in terms of your choices and you know, how you attacked it.
It's nice seeing it with the color chart on the bottom, isn't it? I think it.
Yeah, exactly.
Have that reference. Well, for a start, the very beginning of the film starts off with less color, and then as we get further into the movie and into him becoming a star and a performer, more color comes in, and until we kind of get to Vegas is like the extreme. But a lot of these references I took from still photography and more still photographers than anything else. And for instance, Beale Street was like the color palette of Gordon Parks, and so between myself, the art part, so this and Tupelo, this first stuff where he's reading the Captain Marvel, that is what Baz called black and white color. And I cannot remember the artist that we looked at for that, but Catherine Martin had collected some reference for these, and he called it black and white color because there's color there. It's very controlled, but it's desaturated, and the tones and the shadows of black are quite velvety. So it's not like a desaturated, low contrast.
Right.
And that was what we call black and white color. And then, and as I was saying, very controlled color palette. And then, so some colors would pop, like the red dress, like the lightning bolt on his necklace, the yellow.
Yeah, well, that's a great example. Yeah, this
that
shot
becomes
here.
his TCB, his logo.
That's right.
Yeah.
TCB in a flash.
Exactly. So that we would do a lot of testing with the lenses, and so the Sphero lenses I used at the beginning because they were flatter, and they kind of were reminiscent more of our references for those time periods, and that took us all the way through to Hollywood actually, because it was a flatter sort of there's no distortion in those lenses, and the contrast is pretty natural. Whereas when we get to Vegas, you have I actually got Dan Sasaki to put more color saturation into the lens. Don't ask me how he does that.
Well, he's got his ways for
he
sure.
Does.
That's
and
Dan.
More contrast, and also to put more color back into the flare. More not so just blue flare. So he put green and magenta and yellow back into the.
That's very cool.
Horizontal flares, and also just to keep the aberrations, because I wanted those lenses to look like 70s anamorphics and not like modern anamorphics. So they weren't to be. I wanted all the aberrations in from that time period. But just to, do you want me to go back?
Yeah, some of the like by here we're in full anamorphic world.
Yeah, exactly. And especially
sure.
we'll get into the concerts, and you start to see more color come in, and there you go. For instance, a very good, very strong color.
That's a great shot. I mean, come on, this one right there. That was like ready made for ShotDeck. That image right there. Put it on the poster. That's a wait. We're getting ahead of ourselves. It's hard not to.
I'm
wait.
sorry.
So I have a specific question just because the Spheros. This is quite a wide lens. Does the Sphero, because particularly on 65, which has obviously, the biggest sensor in the world, it's 3 sensors wide, and so coverage is always a very specific challenge on those, particularly on the wide side. Do you recall, like in the kit, what's the is this still part of the Sphero package, this wide lens, or did it have to go to something quite wider? Because I know like almost a 21 is like the max you can go in 65.
Yeah, we didn't go that wide. We had a 30 mil was the widest we went. That looks like a 30 mil.
Got it.
Because it starts to distort.
Yeah, so.
But the sequence we felt like it was right, and again, very meticulous. We did a lot of camera tests for this, and like Baz will never do a test where the actor comes in and stands in front of a grey piece of card. There in these tests there is a mock-up set. There's him in costume, there's hair and makeup, me doing lighting, very specific lighting tests. All the elements are there, and we did quite a few versions of that. And so that's why the color palette is, like I was saying, very harmonious with the visual language of the movie, because we're all there together going, well, that yellow's popping. And then I worked out my LUTs too, because I started with a K1S1 base, and then I had specific LUTs for the time periods and the sets, so that we got it.
And did you use like stills or other things to kind of say, let's push this LUT to kind of because you need some reference of sorts to find that LUT to go, okay, this wants to feel like the 70s, this wants to feel like the 50s, this wants to feel like,
exactly.
Whatever that is. And was it, and sort of brought your colorist or however you work out your LUTs, brought them some of that material to look at? Yeah.
Exactly that. And also, the art department had collected their versions of it, and we'd all just get together and be putting together like a sort of like a lookbook thing, I suppose, where we had ideas that we tested and have those references and then come up with specific ones. And I also, now what I did is I had my daughter working with me. One of her jobs was to put together like a reference, like a visual reference little book every week that I would bring to set. And in that book, like a document, would be go to my camera department and the grips and the visual effects people and the art department. And for instance, this shot you have up now, the reference for that is Gordon Parks, who was a civil rights photographer in the South in that period. And so every day we'd have a book like that would have like all our like, what do you call it? Start with like location pictures and then these reference photographs of the lot, and then the art department reference that they would have offered up, and VFX as well, so that my team every week had this document and everyone was really clear on where we were going with each of the scenes in terms of the look photographically.
And it's so smart though when you talk about how Baz tests and how you guys test together, because again, the whole point of it is to learn something. It's not just to learn, like, does that costume look, good on them? Is it too tight? Is it too this? Does that hair look interesting? But, like, in context, in some sort of context, whether it's, like, the color of the light you might use, whether it's the person's in a spotlight at that point when we're putting them in this costume, or they're a heavy backlight for their hair, whatever it might be. It only gives you information if you actually test it with context, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And because for the 68 special, and for me, my biggest challenge on this movie was the Hilton showroom, because
let's go there while you talk about it, because because first of all, that is a massive set. And one thing I thought about, because I went, if you had to put that show on, it would be an extremely expensive endeavor. And yet, for the film, you basically had to put that show on. Meaning, you had to light it like the show. You might as well have, done 100 shows in there, because you have to do the same work to like make it exactly that.
Yeah,
it
took months.
And it begins, I guess, here where they're starting to make the set, and you see it even in like, well, I guess this is the early Hilton show, but it's the one that's. I guess that's part of it, right?
Yeah, it is. That's the beginning of it.
Yeah.
So during those...
That's the beginning, exactly, yeah.
The rehearsal sequence, I slowly introduced more and more of the lighting. And there was more and more of the art department elements coming in, like the curtains on the side and the instruments and the banquettes where the audience was sitting. That was a slow progression in this montage to get to this. But that's a huge set. So we built that set, the backstage area right around the back of that backdrop, which was a fabric cyc, that was, it was like a muslin, but it was like a theatrical version, that white cyc that I had to change the colour. And then the stage and the side of the stage, and we built like about a third of the audience seating. So then it's extended after that in visual effects. But all the side of the stage we built with those chandeliers and everything. And because, the trickiest thing for me was because we saw a lot of the lights in shot, a lot of them had to be period fixtures. And how work out. So I'm scouring the Australian rock and roll scene for parkans and, soft boxes for the 68 special that were in the TV studio and stuff like that. And then when I could, I had LED lighting in integrated into it. So some of them I put LED lights into the fixtures. For example, like that floor there, that has LED lighting underneath.
Sure, and because you also want... It's funny, I have a very similar challenge myself that we're in the midst of, and trying to sort of find that balance between the real thing and obviously the control. Yeah. But of course, if they had LEDs, they would have used them too.
Exactly. And, I had rock and roll movers that I hid that I could use because I could adjust them for anything that I could do from the dimmer board or an iPad. I did as much as I could because, like you're saying, like your situation, the more control you have over the color and the dimming of the and turning on and off and having access to those as you can. But that sequence where he first comes out on stage, from right round the back of the backdrop to him performing, we did that in one shot. So we had cameras everywhere. But Baz wanted to do it in a sequence. So it was a 20-minute shot where we started with he's walking with the team down the side of the stage. He tunes his guitar. It's broken up into montage in the film, but then Austin went in to sing the concert, and we shot the first 4 songs. So every time we did it, we had, we changed.
Was it this? Did it begin here, Mandy?
It begins before that.
Or was it after this?
It's before that.
But is this in the process? Oh wait, because you're saying it's part. Hold on, let me just turn this down for a second.
There's him.
But it's part of it in a way, yes. Right? It's this sequence here.
Yeah. If you go back a little bit further, even. It starts where they're walking behind the cyclorama, and then it goes all the way onto stage, and he performs the first 4 songs. So that was like my biggest challenge. And I remember when we were talking about, like, if you're saying you're going through this right now, I remember in pre-production, and the gaffer and I were, Sean Conway, who's amazing, who I've done about 5 films with, he and I will say, he said, well, maybe we need to get rock and roll lighting people in to set this up for us, because the show, we've got to do the whole show. We've got to have lighting change. We had to have that showroom to work through all the periods of his Vegas show. So the lighting changed a lot during that time, and we had to research. And then I remember us both turning up to work the next day, and we went, we can do this. And so we did, and we did it, and we set it up, and we controlled it, and replicated that concert that you can see, and that's the way it is. So the colours and the way the follow spot works, the lensing and everything was that first concert we had to replicate that documentary.
It's like, well, that's the thing. I remember it at Graceland. There's those shows, or you can buy those. When I first visited, I think we could buy it on VHS even, but and DVD. But you could, and they'd have them playing throughout. Like the store at Graceland would have TVs that you would see that show. Particularly like his final show. The one that's reflected here at the end, which is like one of the most beautiful sort of. And kind of like that show in which you guys actually show the real footage of him at the end is amazing.
Unchained Melody, it is that song.
Yeah, exactly. That performance of Unchained Melody is like incredible.
One of the very early things that Baz said to me when we were going through the script is he said, I want the camera to dance with Elvis when he's performing. And when he flies, we're going to fly. And when we're in the very high drama and very intimate moments, I really want you to slow down and be elegant and observational. And so this scene here is one of those ones where it's dark. He's caught in this show. He realizes he's never going to escape being in this hotel room. And the camera really slows down, but the color of Vegas is still there. It's still affecting him. He's in his room. He's got all the lights turned off. He can't get away from it. That's kind of the impetus behind having this color still coming in. And but the camera is very elegant in the way. So there's those 3 kind of versions of camera movement and direction in the movie, and this is one of the ones.
And like you say, it's like they're both imprisoned in a way in this like castle that they've built.
Exactly. And then you see when Elvis, he tries to close the curtains off to keep the light coming in. And this was these were a set where we had to connect them but in visual effects, because the sets were both on the same level. and it was actually the same set that was redressed from the
Oh,
Colonel's
so
room to
shot,
Elvis' room.
many,
So we
many
planned
weeks
that.
apart, I suspect, and all that, right?
Exactly, yeah. And also the way it was blue
Well,
sky
I was wondering that
outside when we
about this,
turn
the
around.
bokeh here, which is very well done. I mean, obviously this
Yeah,
edge light silhouette is just so beautiful. I mean, this profile edge light shot is just incredible. Just as an image, you have so many of these kind of like shots of Elvis in profile, shots of Elvis from behind. It's a very, it's really interesting. We meet him from behind as well, in a way, like the way Colonel sees him for the
yeah,
first time.
yeah.
It keeps repeating itself.
That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
And then also, like those were the angles that we looked at from the audition, like that those very specific angles we collected, and then we would talk about when they were going to be in the movie.
This was, I just thought, anytime you have something that is written into the script or in which the characters actually change the light in the scene, I thought is always really interesting. And that I'm like, oh, well, he's gone from there. If he walks further, we'll see him for a second. But then it's like with each closing curtain,
Yeah,
there's less and less. It's a really cool design as far as for a story and a visual and a lighting standpoint.
it was a tricky shot, as I'm sure you know, to get the timing right, and also just to have him have these little glimpses in silhouette against something pretty dark. And then once he turns the TVs on, because he used to be obsessed by television, and he'd have like those multiple TVs, so he's escaping, and so he's closed everything off, and he's moving into like his little world of escape, which is the TV light comes on his face. So that was like, there's a metaphor for that situation. But you see like the camera's very like elegant, observable, and doesn't distract you. And I think that was the idea behind that. Whereas when he's on stage and you have all this visceral kind of movement and the dancing, and we went handheld a little bit with that stuff when we put the cameras in the audience so that we could be from the perspective of those girls.
Oh, here in the early stage, yeah, this stuff.
So
rare.
that, yeah. So that was like part of our visual language.
I wanted to
together.
talk just about that carnival sequence in which the Colonel meets him and approaches him, and then they go into the Hall of Mirrors and that whole little section. Let me just find this section here because, well, first, this Hall of Mirrors thing, is it more or less complex than it looks? Because I remember watching it and thinking, I mean, is there anything technical here that I went, there's a shot coming up where I go, well, I guess it is a Hall of Mirrors, so hiding the camera is as easy as hiding a person, in this thing. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we had a mock-up built of the art department had a mock-up built with mirrors, and I think I thought, again, like we plotted it and we went through with the actors and walked it through and looked at all the angles and got that to work. Yeah. And the lighting of that was tricky too, because that's like one of those sequences where I had to integrate the lighting that was in the set to light the actors as well. So that's why we decided to put those festoon lights vertically in each of the joins of the mirrors.
That's
and that
a really smart decision.
So that we didn't have to try and light them separately.
And what this sequence when they're on the Ferris wheel together? Talk to me about that.
So we shot the Carnival sequence on a backlot at night over 4 nights, the whole exterior, because it was quite a big set for the first time they meet, and then when they do that walk outside the Hall of Mirrors to the Ferris wheel. It was quite a big, like we basically, the art department set up the whole carnival, and we had to light it and shoot. The real Ferris wheel was there, and what we did was, on our first night, we had Austin and Tom ride the Ferris wheel and do the scene, and I had our 50-foot Scorpio crane, and we followed them, and we did a lot of coverage on that first night.
So separate
of
from
this
them,
sequence
yeah,
where it
separate
stops
from
and-
them, independent of their movement, right?
No, no, yes,
Yeah,
yes,
not
independent of their
attached
movement,
to the
exactly.
Ferris wheel
And
itself.
then
Yeah.
no, no, and then all the we shot plates from the Ferris wheel. That was a separate kind of where we did mount cameras in them, but that was more for points of view, looking down, and for backgrounds. And then we shot a mock-up of that carriage that they were in against
Oh,
Bruce Lee.
and then change.
And
Oh,
then
interesting. There you go.
and then sometimes we were kind of locked off with them, but sometimes we had a little bit of sort of float, like we weren't quite connected to them with the camera, and it was still kind of moving, just to keep that kind of sense that we were up in the air, and to sort of, but we sort of kept that, sort of tried to keep it looking like some of them were really long lens, so that it looked like we were away from them,
Right,
they were far away, and to keep
well,
the
and
feel of
having,
it.
I guess, that first day as a reference gave you something to sort of ground back to and say, right, this is the amount, the light that's changing on their faces as they go up and down and all that. Yeah, that's amazing. This scene really struck me too, in part because of the kind of, that leads into this one here, this RCA recordings, in that it was such a really cool way of showing a recording studio, in that obviously not just the stark lighting, but the darkness around it, and it was one of this image and this image, they're so evocative. And tell me a little story about just the conception of this set, because was this based on any source material in terms of I can't imagine it was, or if it was, what a cool thing. But I don't know, I just really loved this little sequence.
It's basically in a black void with the shiny floor, and then we shot the little there's a little like bio box where the art executives are sitting, was shot separately. But it's again, it's trying to show that experience and that kind of for Elvis, of being in this darkness and this kind of a very unfamiliar place with no audience, and he's getting told not to move and being locked down. And it was about showing how restrictive it was. And to do that, we just had no color. We had a lot of sort of blackness in the frame, and just kind of small elements of where he is. And yeah, so it was meant to be like a very emotional.
Yeah, and just like you say, the black box is such a. I feel like that sort of limbo lighting of the sort of nakedness of him against all that darkness also creates such stark imagery, of course. Yeah. What was there's you mentioned, of course, the Hilton and that set, which is monumental, but what were some of the other sequences when you sort of were in early prep that sort of scared you a bit, or you focused a lot more attention on because they had some specific challenges?
I think that the 68 special was, again, a really important thing, because there's a lot of different setups.
Because this is part of the 68 special here?
Yeah. All those, and they are in the 68 special. And some of them are not in it, actually. Some of them they shot that didn't appear in the show. And here, again, is a situation where I had to get lighting fixtures that were going to be in shot, but also be able to light him. And I also wanted it to be a little bit more complimentary than it was in the TV show, because here you see, like, I tried not to front light him, so that whenever there's something that I do, and I did on this film, is that I try and, I'm lighting for the train spotting sequences. So you see all those TV lights up there, and some of them have LED. Like some of those boxes have LED fixtures in them. And then there's parkans, obviously, and there's those soft lights, those scoop soft lights. I try and light for 360 degrees, so that when we are shooting, I know and work off a dimmer board, and I'm sure you're the same, is that I have things waiting, so that when the camera turns around, the lights are there. They're not on all the time, but I have a dim board and then I move. But what I also did in this, and I did it on the stage as well, is I'd move the lights around as we were moving the cameras sometimes. And if you do it elegantly enough, you don't see it. And it's a trick. And for instance, here in some of these sequences, I did it where the backlight's chasing the camera, but you don't see it because it happens so as the camera's going. And I did that a bit on this.
Well, and I think it's interesting too, because like when you're going for the verisimilitude, like you said, actually having now a chance to do it more flattering is, so much of it is like, well, he's on stage, put him in a spotlight, and then you're like, well, it looks great when I'm directly behind him. I'll take that shot all day long. But then what about the reverse? I'll maybe go to profile, but like once we come around, it's like, what are we doing here? Yeah, that's a really, really interesting dilemma, to say the least, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think especially in a concert sequence, you get away with it more because, you know, lights are changing or whatever. But and then he was standing on a light box here too. But yeah, there's a good example. And see that bio box up there, like the control room, that we shot separately in a swimming pool actually. And on one of the stages at the studio where we were shooting, we had the camera in a swimming pool and we built the control room on the edge of it so we could get that angle.
Oh wow, that's an interesting thing. I never would have thought of that. Right, like. Because you need to get underneath it to have the right perspective.
Yeah, and we didn't have the height on stage to have it at that distance, at that height. So we mapped it all out. And I mean, you know, like, you know, I'm sure now our relationship with visual effects has to happen very early on. And you're constantly in this dialogue with them. For instance, you know, for something like that, we had all the measurements and we went and plotted it and we knew where the angles had to be to match the point of view. And, you know, and blue screen, you know, what is exactly going on that blue screen. And for instance, that sequence where he is in Vegas, we would pick stills and reference stills that I was lighting to. You know, I never kind of ever did something where I didn't know it was going to be out there. For instance, you know, like when he's in that hospital room and the Colonel opens the curtains and tricks him again, you know, like he's in hospital and he says, well, and Elvis is saying, well, I'm going to leave. I'm going to go my own way because I want to travel internationally, which he never did.
Oh, I know. Yeah, of course. The film.
Yeah, back in that six. And so when he opens the curtains in his room, the sun's pouring in. It's a front lit flat light. It's not this one. It's when he's in the hospital room. It's might be after this, but that we knew where the sun was going to be, and the sun was going to be reflecting off a building, and we had a reference for that. So that the image of the showroom, of course, the background's been put in post, but we would be there on set with the photograph saying this is what's going to happen. He opens the curtain and the bright light. I mean, the thing about that I did a few times in this movie is it's about the experience of that, and like that is like being in the showroom. There's a follow spot on him. There's a light shining on him. You're going to be the star on stage. You're going to be glowing and shining. And it goes back to his experience. Like I'm going backwards in the film early on where he goes to see with those little boys. So the way that I lit that scene is it's like a little concert. Like there's shafts of light and it's reminiscent of the future. So it's like a moment where he sees, this performance, and there's the kind of the music and the sexuality and the dance, and it's like a little premonition, you know. It's like it's what is his perception of this moment was like that for me. And the same in the Pentecostal tent, like there's little spotlights shining on him.
Oh yeah, I remember because this image in the Pentecostal I thought was like this like overhead image that comes in here, like where you see this center, like as if there's a, you know, again, there's a spotlight in the center of it all. Yeah. You know, for him to look up. Yeah, it's this shot here, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like a sort of a premonition of the experience that's going to come to him And then I did want to. You did ask me, sorry, about that scene outside the hayride with the fog, where they're in the fog and they're outside waiting to go in. And Soul Lighter was my reference.
Oh, is
for
that right?
scene, where the lights glowing from inside. And again, it's that kind of the idea that there's something really special happening inside there, and they're outside.
Oh, this
not
one.
going
Yeah,
in.
right. Exactly.
Yeah, it's glowing. It's magical, and he's kind of working himself up. But it's that sort of thing of, you're going to be a star. You're going to be on stage, and this is the experience.
Well,
of
yeah,
that.
that's what I think this image was so emotional for me, is this idea that the brightest thing in the frame, he's not there yet. It's like this is like a future place that he
Yes.
can go to, but he's on the cusp
Exactly.
of it, right? He's like right there, and he's waiting in the shadows
Yes.
for his turn. But that's where you're
Yep.
going. Like that's the
Yep.
that's as evocative as those
Yep.
spotlight silhouettes that you have throughout the film, which are amazing. And
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
it's
exactly
really,
right.
really
Yeah, but for that color palette and that kind of, that was Soul Lighter was our reference for
very,
that.
very cool.
The stills
Yeah,
photography.
well, that's it was an incredible time, for still photography and America,
Yeah.
the American Southwest and the American South, or the American South, I should say, in terms of photography in that time, it was furtive with color, to say the least. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's again, you were saying, is how do you put an audience in that time period, and how do you get them to experience? And the references are, cinema and photography and art of the time, and the same with the lensing, how do we get them to feel like the lensing is doing it, like it more subtly, but it does the same thing.
And this this Graceland sequence, a lot of it does feel like you're living a bit on like the 30 mil lens for some sections of it. It's like, oh, this is a real wide lens section. Obviously you get quite longer later in the film and in certain points, but you really feel that like almost sequences were done like more on the wider end of the lens scale.
Exactly, and then we get longer and more intimate as we get further into the drama. And the other thing about this sequence too is that there was meant to be a real change of the environment, because they come from that little apartment, and then all of a sudden they're in this place that was full of light and full of color, and the blue walls and the greenery. It was meant to be quite a big jump and something quite glowy and yeah, it's such a change for that family. Such a big, like, if all of a sudden they're in this mansion, and that feeling of
and
that.
it's funny because it's both incredibly big and also really homey when you go and see it in person. Because it was his home. It wasn't this thing.
It's not.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's like, for the time, obviously, it was everything he ever dreamed of and wanted. But it's surprisingly kind of intimate inside. All right, this sequence. I mean, this is obviously a very pivotal sequence and quite large. Again, in terms of this sequence where he's asked to sort of not do his thing. Take me through that. This is a cool image.
This is shot on stage, and we were going to shoot it outside. And when we were looking at it, the weather wasn't looking great, and everyone was concerned because we were quite a few days in there doing this, and we had a lot of extras. So we ended up shooting on stage, and this is a sequence that was documented by a photographer called Alfred Wertheimer, and he travelled with Elvis for quite a few months, and he shot this concert on stills and on 16 mil black and white film. And so I had a lot of reference. So some of these images here, I was replicating his images, and there's a couple, I think, where they stop, and it was in a stadium. So to create the stadium lighting, because I couldn't get those big stadium, that time there wouldn't be HMI, but those big stadium lights, huge, up stanchions up in the distance. So what we did was we put together maxi brutes, and we had like them in a little pattern. I think there would have been 18 or something there, I can't remember. And we had them closer, But with our lensing, I lessened the depth of field, and we had the atmosphere to make them look like they're further away. So
Wow.
they kind of, because the trick, because they weren't the same size. But when you saw them and I did a lot of lens tests there and lighting tests to get that feeling right, that they appeared to be further away. And again, this is a sequence where I moved the light around so that he was underlit by the ground rose, but as we moved around, I changed backlight so that he was always backlit and the audience were always backlit. But the other thing was, see those ground rose too, we put LEDs in those. We got together with the art department and made them because those girls were draping.
Right, it would be so hot.
And you would
it would burn them. Yeah, of
really
course.
Hot, incandescent light. Yeah. So we had
right. You could see literally that they're on top
of
them here.
I did end up shooting most everything on the 65 because, like, where we were swapping around between different formats and different images and split screen images, and we had plans of what was going to go in our split screen. So we'd have where Elvis was in this part of the frame, where he was in here, and then there's a montage where he goes through lifting up his cape with all the different capes and stuff like that. But the testing that we did with visual effects, getting the images to look like 16mm or Super 8, and then we'd crop them and we would frame for the cropping when we were shooting. We could only do that because I remember at one point we talked about shooting on different formats, and because we had so much of this stuff, and it would never be obviously at the same time, or we couldn't say, well, we're going to do all the 16mm this week, that we had to work out a way of doing it. So I had an LF there as well for some of the sequences for slow motion, but that was really the only reason we had those cameras. Really, were on the 65 for the whole time, and we used like live grain in post. And
I think the 65 still has. I think the 65 still has so much merit. I mean, I'm shooting on it now for the new Joker, so it's like I still like it. It still feels different than the LF. It's still something different. Yeah, I still really like it. I know. You really use that sensor. It's like it's something like nothing else a little bit. Yeah.
And don't you think, like, it does two things for me? And I remember thinking this when I saw Lawrence of Arabia. Is that it's a camera for epic wide shots because it gives you that, but it's also a camera that's really beautiful for an intimate close-up because you can drop the depth of field off because you have less depth of field, or you can do a full shot of someone on a 50mm and have the depth of field of a 50mm and not be on a 24. You know what I mean? Like, it gives you so much more scope to get different feels. That's why I really like it. And I think for this film it was great because I could do that.
It does exactly what you say. It's both intimate and incredibly wide and cinematic at the same time. Yeah. It's what portrait photography is. Yeah. Exactly. Listen, your work is amazing, and it's just every frame I could talk about. Honestly, I could talk about every single frame, and I remember seeing it in the theater when it came out that weekend, and just marveling at how complex the movie is, and how emotional the lighting is, and how emotional the photography is, and how it captures this incredible performance by Austin, who's remarkable, and that's a really daunting thing to take on Elvis. It's not an easy thing to jump into, you did such a wonderful job capturing and being so bold. Like, I guess my last question would be, what was it an experience in which you were constantly feeling sort of open and free and present and in the flow of it all, or were there times when you were quite scared? Am I going too far? Is this or was it just like what was we can't control the outcome of these movies in any way at all, right? We have no control over them, and so the experience of making them is kind of everything, and that's its own satisfaction. And so in what was your ultimate, not the outcome but the experience of making this film?
I think that's a really good question. I think for me, because I know that Baz is the way that we work together is now, for me, it's of course inspiring and exciting, but because we have that language already about in our working relationship, I feel very comfortable knowing that if I say to him, we have to do another test for this sequence because we need to know what this costume looks like in this lighting, or what the texture of, say, the that Vista liner, the motorhome that he has outside at MGM, and he'd said to me, I want to do a shot where I know we're going to go right from one end of the bus all the way out the windscreen, and so then I'd said, we have to test this because I need to get the crane through. I need to make sure that before they build it, that the head's going to fit through to do that shot for you, and reflections and the textures and the lighting and the light fixtures, and they're all in the right spot. So I feel like with him, he gets that, and he has a chance to play as well. So doing these kind of tests in pre-production made me feel so much more comfortable. And I think also just having that, I think and I'm sure you're the same. And every movie, there's some kind of challenge for you that you haven't done before. Or there's a storytelling point that you go, oh, wow. I mean, on the top of my head, I can't offer up anything, so let's discover it. And for this movie, it was for me like that because I'd never shot a concert movie before, and performance like that. And having someone as amazing as Austin, an incredible performer and magical, and also a really nice guy, was a really special experience. But I feel like it was very satisfying because I feel like we had the time to do it properly, and we did, we spent time planning and never kind of being in a situation where nobody knew what was going on, or we wouldn't be able to kind of, change something quickly because something else would happen, because we were already really prepared, and my crew were there with me, on the same page. So it was satisfying. I felt really exhilarated. But when we were doing these, I mean, the music's amazing, and we all learned the songs, and the camera operators would be bopping on set and wiggling their bottoms. And
at the end of those days, you're singing those songs for the rest of the day, and then the new song, then that's what you're singing for the rest of the day. Yeah, I know that feeling for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. But I'm lucky to work with someone like Baz, who's generous and collaborative and inspiring, and just a very, great collaborator on set. And when he's on set, he speaks to everybody, and he'll come up to the crane operator and say, I feel like you're not quite, it's got to be, and he'll stand next to the crane and do a little conducting. When we're doing that riffing thing, I'll say, like after we do the shots, we plan, and he'll say, I'll stand next to you, and let's do a shot where I'm just kind of going, and the crane operator gets really excited, and it's just really kind of involving like that in terms of people's contribution.
Good on you guys. I'm excited for the next one you guys do.
Thank you.
So, anyway, congrats on the film, and congrats on everything
Thanks,
you've
Larry.
been doing with your career. It's been
thank you.
It's been fun to watch, and it's inspiring. Trust me. I have a deck for Joker that has shots from your films. So there you go.
Oh, good on you. Well, thanks. Well, that's very flattering to me because I'm also a huge fan of yours. So thank you. It's an honor to be.
Yeah, it's thank you for joining us. I'm sure everyone watching got a lot out of it. So I know I did. So there you go.